짧은 시간이라
Good afternoon. Apology for the short break. So we'll start the discussion session, and thank you for the presentations. And we will spend 40 minutes on discussions involving the presenters and panelists. And we'll also take some questions. So if you have questions or comments about presentations, then you can use the Q&A session. And today we have 3 panelists. First, we have Mr. Jung Woo-young, attorney at law from Lee & Co. Mr. Jung is an expert in marine finance, or he's actually the leading attorney at law. He's been there for the very start of the marine finance, so he is the living history of the marine finance, and he's given the government a lot of advice in this area. And we also have Mr. Youngnak Ju, expert advisor from B&K Management Research Institute. Mr. Sung spent 33 years in Industrial Bank of Korea, and he's an expert in aircraft finance. He's a published author, and he's also doing his research, doctoral research in the area. And we have Mr. Cho Gi-hwan, Maritime Investment Finance Division General Manager from Korea Asset Management Corporation. And he's been dealing with more than 100 vessels in maritime finance. And as a general manager of the department, he deals with overall issues related to marine finance. So I've introduced 3 panelists. So we'll start from Mr. Sung, Mr. Cho, and then Mr. Jung. And there will be exchange of comments among the panelists and presenters, and we'll open the floor to get some questions from the audience after that. And we're joined by 2 presenters online from Japan and from Greece. So you can ask your questions, you can direct your questions to 2 presenters too. So please.
Good afternoon. My name is Youngnak Ju, expert advisor from B&K Management Research Institute. And Professor Mitsuda Takuma talked about the marine cluster in Japan. I was curious about that, so thank you for a great presentation. And what I would like to talk about is actually related to Professor Takuma's presentation. And in order for Korea to develop marine finance, there are so many things we need. However, we have to think about the need clearly and how can we respond to the changes. So let me talk about this. We had 4 rounds of a shipping crisis in Korea. And the ownership and operation of ships were not separated in Korea. That exacerbated the crisis. As you know, the boom and there have been ups and downs of the market. And when there was a surplus in ships, the price goes down and it becomes a negative situation. And when there is a liquidity issue in the financial market, it impacted the shipping industry as a whole. So for the sound development of the shipping industry, we have to separate different aspects of the industry. Korea is one of the top 10 economic countries in the world. However, we lack a professional management of the vessels. So we use this term, shipping companies, and we say that a non-operating ship owners. But there is a accounting related risk about this. So we need some changes. And PBCH was the major mechanism. So it was the lease, but the lease was not widely spread in Korea. And for Korea to develop this business, what can we do? I came up with some ideas. So just as in the example of Japan, I would like to see the diversification. So in Korea, for the first time, now we are seeing the non-operating ship owner, which is a pilot project. This is a meaningful step. However, I would like to see the ship owner in the private sector, not in the public sector. Why do we need this? Because it is the counter-clinical investment. So we can see the gain in the price of vessels. So we have to absorb the risk during the difficult times by investing in the vessel itself. So when is the lowest point and the highest point of the market? Ship owners should have this kind of knowledge and professionalism, and they should be able to make a quick decision. And it is not the financial area, but the business itself. So public sector is important. However, we need the private sector's efforts. So rather than the public sector, I believe that the business is more proper for the private sector. And China and Japan have so many leasing companies. However, in Korea, we do not have any proper ship owners. So we say that we are a maritime powerhouse, but China and Japan, they own leasing companies at a larger scale shipyard, but we don't have that. And I know that about 80 ship owners are operating in Japan. And as covered in the presentation, the local-based private banking institution should be activated. So you mentioned some examples such as Hiroshima, and the financial institutions work with the ship owners leading the marine cluster. And we need such local banks in Korea to facilitate the marine industry. They should lead the financing so that we can also develop our own marine cluster. And it is a little bit similar to Japan. So we have the largest shipyard and we have the largest cargo volume, and so we have this advanced ecosystem. So that is why if we can develop the local banks, I believe that we can secure long-term stability. And the government and local governments should make efforts to foster ship owners. So in case of China, in 2007, the Chinese government encouraged the commercial banks to go into the financial lease. And when they are in financial distress, mother banks are supposed to replenish their capital. It is legalized in China. So customer management and replenishment of capital during crisis, it is giving benefits, and those banks under the mother bank can enjoy the same credit rating. And Chinese banks have really taken off thanks to this legislation. So for shipbuilding and shipping industries in Korea, I believe that we have to develop tax incentives. Fourth point I would like to mention is about training professionals. So it is operating a lease, so it is different from financial lease. So we need to build the capacity in the knowledge of vessels and businesses themselves. So they should develop the sense of the market, and they should know how to evaluate the value of the vessels, and they should be equipped with the knowledge in the financial market. And when we look at the professional pool for the shipbuilding industry, we do not have sufficient human resources. The financial institutions have this rotation system based on 3 years. And in Korea, financial institutions do not have a marine industry dedicated organization. They do many other jobs at the same time. That is why it is hard to develop expertise in the marine finance. So we need a dedicated team under the financial institution. And the communication of the information is not sufficient as well. And we can introduce the life cycle-based career management system, or we can recruit someone who worked in the marine field before at a financial institution. The fifth one, from the longer perspective, financial institutions should develop their own approach. We need long-term lending, which is more than 5 years or 10 years for the marine industry. However, we have a put option at 5-year or 7-year. That is why financial institutions should reconsider this mechanism, especially in the time of a recession. They can increase LTV for shipping companies, or sales and lease could be promoted during those crises, so that we can achieve co-prosperity between financial institutions and shipping companies. And in 2026, KOBC is now doing a ship owner pilot project. However, we have to make a spin-off at the end of the day. So in the portfolio, we do not have the leasing company for aircraft as well, let alone ship and vessel leasing company. But the government has a willpower now. So instead of having only vessels, but also aircraft in the portfolio, I think that is an ideal direction for Korea to take, just like Japan and China. And that could be the starting point for a cooperation system. Thank you.
Thank you for the comment. So the financial ship owner or ship owning companies are not really what we used to know or what we used to have in Korea, but we see some development of such system in Japan and also in Greece after financial crisis in 2008. In Greece, financial activities in marine area stayed almost the same level. So I think it's because of this strong relationship with the ship owners and ship owning companies. And so I'd like to invite the second commenter. Hello, I'm Cho Gi-hwan from Camco, and thank you for the deep comment. I think what I'm going to share with you is pretty similar, and I'm really interested in Japanese marine cluster. So my question is, about the Japanese presentation, Professor Takuma. And Japan is such a good example. It is a good reference case, textbook case for so many governments. So, but a lot of investment should go into building marine cluster, and it is also very sensitive to economic cycle around the world. So it should be supported by local demands first. So local demand should be strong. That's my opinion. So in that sense, the marine cluster in Japan has a huge impact on the local economy around that region. And in your presentation, what I found really interesting is the challenges involving environmental changes, like ships getting bigger and the types are getting more diverse. And the ship owners, they of course take out they charge their vessels to Japanese companies, but they also charter their vessel to foreign companies too. And the contract terms are getting shorter and shorter, as you mentioned in your presentation. So challenges, well, you mentioned some challenges, right, to marine clusters. So regarding those challenges, what will be some policy solution of the Japanese government or some initiative of private companies or industry players? Yes, thank you for the question. Then we'll just move on to the third commenter, and then we'll answer we'll move on to the answers. And Mr. Jung has prepared some slides, right? Do you have the slide? No, not yet. Okay. Well, just gonna go ahead. Anyway, I am a counselor at law, and my expertise in ship finance. And well, I used to know that I thought I know that the shipping industry and marine industry was booming. And now I'm here and listening to all those presentations. I think, well, there are issues. A lot of changes are happening, and we will never go back to the heydays. And finance, BAU finance will not be available anymore. That's what I feel right now. So by 2026, maybe we'll see some deregulation happening. So that's silver lining. And I really enjoyed the presentation about the marine cluster. And Professor mentioned uncertainty going forward, especially about new fuel ships, uncertainty about investment. And he also mentioned the technological development. So, but I have these different impressions from different regions, from Japan and from Europe. So different changes are happening, different environmental changes are happening in different regions. So how I see it is that first, for green ships, we are going towards green ships, of course. It's very immediate change. We're going to see it in the near future. And the second issue is there will be increasing demand for more fleet, bigger fleet. And this is also bigger ships. And this is also what I found during many studies and research. And I also added this in parentheses, how Professor Kim In-han mentioned this in his publication in National Assembly meeting. So ships are getting older, and all these old ships must be replaced by green ships. And if you look at the figure here, by 2030, 56 trillion won will be needed, and by 2040, 41 trillion, and by 2050, 47 trillion won. So huge amount of money will be needed to replace all these old ships. And also, we talk about global choke points, all those risks for war and global inflation and diseases, pandemic. So we see more and more global choke points. So the total route will become longer. And the deadweight tonnage will also become bigger. And we also have to think about bottleneck phenomenon because of this change in global supply chain that's led by India. So what all this says is that we are going to need bigger ships, we're going to need longer routes. Then what is our situation right now? In Korea, what commercial banks or private banks are not players in this picture, because government-run or state-run institutions are dealing with all these issues. And private banks do not have any ship financing product or designated team. Because of the impact from Basel III, they have a certain requirements for this accounting purpose. Accounting purpose for allowance for doubtful account. So I told you that 142 trillion won will be needed for replacing all these old ships. So 142 trillion is a huge money for private banks. It's a huge risk. So this is why the state-run institutions must cover this risk. But if you look at the situation in Japan, EO Bank, Hiroshima Bank, all these local banks are really active in ship financing. We are not doing anything, but Japanese banks are doing already so many things here. So private banks are not motivated to do so. So if there's a lack of tonnage, then the cargo fee will increase, right? So cargo owners will suffer, but there's no loss for banks. And that's why they're not really active or motivated to secure more deadweight tonnage. So what I'm saying is that in Korean situation, commercial banks are not motivated, and they see so much risk in jumping into the ship finance. So our homework, our task here is that we need to secure or expand more investment or more participation from the private players, from capital market. And my personal solution here, well, this is totally my idea. First, we need to think about tax lease system. So in Europe, there's a tax lease in France, and the UK, and in Japan, they also have this JOLCO. So there are some countries that have adopted tax lease, and the benefits from their tax lease should go to banks, private banks in Korea. I think that could be a solution. That could hedge some cost risk or loss risk. And we should also be more active in taking advantage of tax benefits. And we have this act, Supply Chain Stability Act, and we need to amend this act to include more benefits for shipping finance and maritime finance. And another solution is public ship owning program. So if it's not feasible for private companies, then maybe public should continue to jump in or intervene, but in a more active manner. So this was actually argued by Professor Kim Min-hyun. So we should provide operational lease to shipping companies. If we can't do the ship owning project, then maybe we should think of alternatives like shipping lease. So his point was that instead of just letting or forcing the private companies to jump in with their own risk, maybe public institutions can take the lead in implementing this project without any risk. Yes, thank you for the comment. And my special thanks to two presenters. Thank you for your patience. And some of the questions were directed to you, Professor Matsuda and Professor Sihinas. I'm sorry. So the environmental changes, we're seeing some environmental changes, and Professor Orestes?
So I have a question for you, Professor Sihinas. So at the end of your presentation, you mentioned alternative source of financing. So you mentioned alternative source of financing. And how do you think it will take form in the future? So what will be the format of alternative source of financing? So I will let Professor Takuma answer the question first, and afterward, Professor Sihinas.
Sorry, thank you for comments. And I'm not sure if I have answered the question properly, but I'll try to answer as briefly as possible about the things I can answer. In Japan, there is a history of many small shipping companies becoming ship owners. And there is also a history of financial institutions and shipping companies helping to own ocean-going vessels. For example, in Hiroshima area. Therefore, I think that in order to promote ship ownership in Korea, it will be necessary to have some support of the shipping industry, the government and financial institutions. I think that the specific method will depend on the situation on Korea, so please avoid to answer. And next one is in the case of Japan, local financial institutions are not very promising because the local economy is shrinking, except around Tokyo. And on the other hand, it is not uncommon for the result of financing to very greatly depending on the skills of the person in charge of at a local financial institution. For example, in the same financial institution, results become different if if different person is in charge of financial activities. And so I would like to mention that human resource education is very important for maritime shipping, especially for regional institution. And next one is the Japanese government, relationship between Japanese government. And there is tax incentive for ship owners, but I think it is not enough for ship owners. And the Japanese government does not intervene in contract periods or transaction details. And as I mentioned earlier, the relationship between shipping companies and the government is currently weaker than in South Korea and China. Therefore, I don't think there is many things that the Japanese government can intervene regarding most of the issues. And the third one, we recognize that about investment in ship. I recognize that ship owners understand that investment in vessels is necessary, of course, but they are in a situation where they do not know which type of new fuel ship to invest in. As you pointed out, we recognize some regional banks are trying to be active in terms of environmental response. These are my answers. So it would be happy for it if it is sufficient. Thank you.
예, 감사합니다.
So, in a nutshell, the government's support for the financial field is required, and not only the professionalism, but also the continuity of the job in the same position should be ensured. And the government's relationship with the industry will be unique in Japan. So now we are going to invite Professor Orestes Suhinas to answer the question.
Thank you very much. First of all, allow me to agree with most of the comments that were highlighted by the, let's say, invited gentlemen at the panel. And I also agree that education and training is pivotal for the development of the cluster. That is also my experience in Germany, where I had, let's say, a key role in developing this expertise for the ship financing sector. But when it comes to banks, allow me to say that I think that you are attacking the problem of financing and the creation of a cluster by, let's say, using a big cannon to kill mosquitoes. And allow me to say why. Banks, as you very correctly said, are subjects of Basel III. So the reduction, let's say the shrinkage, the reduction of the exposure of banks to ship financing is not because shipping gives, let's say, has, let's say, a bad risk and yield results. Quite the opposite. Ship finance is a quite lucrative business, a very profitable business for the banks. The problem is Basel III and how the good quality of assets, let's say the good money internally, is allocated for projects. So in Europe, the solution was the alternative investment and financial mechanism, that is, let's say, the directive for the funds. And I think that regulated funds, that is, let's say, entities that can be easily set up by groups of experts, funds that have a very well-focused strategic objective. For example, a fund could, let's say, focus on small ships, coastal ships, or very green ships, or even ships that are, let's say, produced and manufactured in a specific region. I don't know, for example, in Busan. That could be, let's say, the solution. So we have funds for all the, let's say, for the whole spectrum of risk, and that means also for the whole spectrum of yield. And investors, either banks, institutional investors, and of course private investors, can also uh, let's say, put money into the funds. The interesting part is that the regulated funds, at least under the European framework, which is almost similar to the US framework, they have to follow all the reporting and all the, let's say, KYC and compliance requirements as we have for the large banks. So instead of, let's say, using a canon that is, let's say, a huge bank to allocate funds for clients, then smaller facilities, funds, for example, regulated facilities, could, let's say, do the job for you. And this is also what we see from the very large institutional investors in Europe, where they have, let's say, amounts of money to put in the industries, but they do not want to, let's say, allocate all these funds in one basket. The other point, and somebody mentioned that the bigger is the better in ship finance. That is true when it comes, let's say, to motherships, container motherships. Let's say ships that connect, for example, the Far East with the West U.S. coastline, or let's say with European ports. The economies of scale in these routes is very important. However, there might be other segments in the market, like the below 45,000 tons. Let's call them handies, which is, let's say, a wider category, that could have a very keen interest originally. So if, let's say, you have regional banks, and this is the case in Europe, for example, or in some cases in Europe, they do not go for the very big risks. They do not go for the very big clients, let's say the global container lines, or let's say the huge energy transportation companies, let's say companies with, I don't know, 40, 50 VLCCs, or even, I don't know, 20, 30 LNG carriers. But they go for the small risks of the short sea shipping vessels, of the coastal vessels, 5, 10, 15, 25,000 tons, vessels that serve the regional needs. And allow me to remind you also that every market, every cluster has a different history. So it is not possible, for example, to replicate, if I'm allowed to say so, the German banking, or let's say the English banking, where we have 300, 400 years of evolution through the development of own fleets, and then through the leasing out of own fleets. So I think that the Korean cluster has a huge potential because of the technological advancement in Korea generally. I think that Korea has historically proven the capacity to deliver, which is a huge asset in terms of reputation for the ship owning community. And what is maybe missing is, let's say, smart financing solutions, not necessarily through the very large institutions, but through regulated entities that could address the appetite, the risk yield, let's say, sweet points for investors of all sorts. And one last point about the alternative financing. I would be very careful to go public. We need to keep ship financing among potential investors. And I think it's very important to integrate ship financing within the chain of sustainable finance. That means that, considering the life cycle assessment, that is not only mandated from the IMO, but it is also mandated by other, let's say, financial regulations. The ship should become, or ship financing should shift from, let's say, pure asset based, pure project-based financing to a more chain financing, let's say, to integrate the asset ship within the value chain of transportation, which in my view is of huge importance for interest in Korea, because as you very correctly highlighted, a huge part of your economy is actually based on the exports and the export capacity, which is a similar attitude to Japan, but as said, Japan has a different history of economic evolution. Thank you.
예, 굉장히 제가
Thank you very much for the full answer. Also involving some presentations from Mr. Chung. Thank you very much for your insightful comment. So alternative finance. What I expected from this is alternative finance, how it is defined in token economy. But you rather mentioned some perspectives from supply chain, how we should approach in a more comprehensive manner, not just from the ship itself. Okay, thank you. And we will have some time for exchanging comments and taking some questions from the audience. So do you have any questions or comments? Thank you. I'm Namsu Park, and I used to work at Uri Bank. And I was working at the bank, but I didn't see any work related to ship financing because we didn't have any experts at the bank, expert of ships or ship finance. And we did see some cases where vessels worked as a collateral, and so you would sometimes have to put the vessel in the auction. Sometimes we see the cost of executing the auction is too high. The bidding is just the cost of bidding is too high. So sometimes this loss outnumbers the benefits. So this shows how much cost is required for any transaction related to ships. So maybe this is the area where government could jump in for help. But I'm doubtful whether this could be a big incentive or motivation for commercial banks. So, well, maybe for big banks like KB or Uri Bank, but the thing is that I don't think they will be interested because they have so many other options that are safer, that are risk-free, and that are more profitable. So ship financing is not really attractive for them. And there's a bill that is proposed at the National Assembly where an entity where a ship owning entity can be built. So what do you think? Well, thank you for the question. Yes, I partially agree that commercial banks will not be motivated. That is not a big incentive. And you also mentioned this bill at the National Assembly. Well, first, from 2003 to 2008, the accumulated exposure to ship financing was 30 trillion and Uri Bank took the largest share of that. So Uri Bank was really active in ship financing in those years. And deducting all this 70% of LTV, well, Uri Bank decided that it's profitable enough. So the procurement cost is currently 2.3%. So that is the barrier for commercial banks. So if we can adopt the tax lease, then maybe they can have 7 years of compensating for this cost. So I think this could be a huge incentive for commercial banks, this tax lease. So, and as far as I know, the Busan Finance Agency is also hugely interested in this system, and there are some companies and some banks that are taking interest in this. And you also mentioned this new bill, the Court of Justice for Maritime Affairs. So this bill is talking about building the Maritime Court of Justice. So yes, that will help. And the court will probably deal with maritime affairs mostly, but they are not going to be the exclusive jurisdiction for those affairs, and they're going to be dealing with other issues too. But I think that will really help.
감사합니다.
Thank you very much. I wanted to refrain from making a comment today, but we have a speaker from Greece, Professor Orestes Sihinas. And I thought it is a great opportunity to talk to him. That's why I would like to ask a couple of questions to him. To be honest, in Busan, we would like to make marine finance the specialty of Busan. That's why we study tax finance, tax lease, and local finance and everything. But I have 2 questions for you. So now we are seeing a paradigm shift. So we are looking at the transition into eco-friendly ships. And Korea and Japan have this attitude of wait and see, which fuel will be promising. I think it is an important strategy for the purpose of a business. And we would like to have the commercially viable strategy. However, when we finally see the new paradigm in place, if we fail to respond to the trend of eco-friendliness, we might be left behind. So that's our concern. So here is my question. So within the IMO, the accelerated regulation is applied for Northern Europe and Southern Europe, led by Greece. So you have ETS, and I believe that Southern Europe and Northern Europe might have different opinions on the system itself and the speed of application of this new scheme. So do you have this kind of a discussion between Southern and Northern Europe, or have you already completed the discussion and fully ready to embrace the ETS? I'm very curious about that. And the second question is about the ship owner business. And I believe that in Greece, the ship owner business, especially in the private sector, is fully advanced, unlike Asian countries. I know that you already operate on a global stage in terms of a ship owner business. And I believe that even though it is the private sector business, you are the first country which provided tonnage tax incentives. So the target of the tonnage tax incentive is about shipping related earnings. And what about non-shipping related tax? So you are supposed to pay the corporate tax in that case. But in the process of applying tonnage tax, so as a result of S&P, we have the capital gain. So when we sell the vessel, ship owners sell their vessel through S&P and they have this capital gain. Then are we supposed to apply the tonnage tax or corporate tax for that capital gain? And when we start to operate the tax lease in Korea, I think tax regime will be very important. So that is why I would like to ask for your advice. So right now in Greece, so capital earning or S&P earning, are you applying the tonnage tax or corporate tax? I'm curious. So please share your knowledge with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is quite interesting that you mentioned Greece. In Greece, first of all, the intervention of the state in shipping or in the ship owning and management business is marginal, if not, non-existent. So generally, the private interests like ship owners, banks, brokers, charterers, whoever, they do not have anything to do with the government. There is no relation to the government. Going back to what you said about the Greek regime, the law in Greece was introduced in the late 50s. So it is an instrument, it's a policy instrument that has been introduced more than 70 years back. And the idea was to protect the capital from shipping that is coming back to the country as a foreign direct investment. So it has nothing to do with the taxation. It is a constitutional proviso for the protection of foreign direct investment. This is unique. So practically, in Greece, if you buy a ship, if you, let's say, make earnings or losses from the ship, if, let's say, you manage ships, or the capital influx is practically non-taxable. The idea for the tonnage tax back in the 50s was very simple. In order to estimate the corporate profit or loss, or let's say at the level of the asset, or at the level of the corporation, you need also to have, let's say, accounts. You need the receipts. You need all of these, let's say, elements that make the corporate profit or loss very well defined. So there is no issue. How can you, let's say, have all these invoices from all these foreign countries, compatible to the Greek law? So the idea was very simple. Instead of, defining the profit and the loss, there is a fee that is paid by the ship to the state every year, regardless if the ship is making profit or losses. I do know that this is a huge academic discussion. I do know that many policymakers still think that the best way of imposing taxes on ships is to consider capital gains. But allow me to say that in most states, practically in most European states, there is a tonnage tax regime. So there is no corporate tax, there is no tax on capital gains, or there is no other taxation burden. Going back to what you said about the financing and the ETS and the different interests between the north and the southern parts of Europe. As I said, the environmental regulation in Europe is becoming strict, even stricter than in other places. And the focus lies not on the ship or on ship operations, but the focus lies on the financial institutions. So the Europe is not attacking, let's say, shipping operations per se. Europe is attacking the financial institutions. That means that the capital that is provided from the financial institutions to shipping should comply to the, let's say, wider environmental policies. If these policies are good or bad, this is debatable, but at the end of the day, we just have to comply to the law. I mean, this is, let's say, it is a law, so we take it for granted. And about the technological risks, you are very well. I mean, what you said is accurate. Japan and Korea and other states at the IMO, they have adopted a policy of hold and see, because the debate is still on. What I can tell you is the following: the Northern European countries like Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark, these countries, they sell technology. Out of the ships that you are building in Korea, Japan, and China, I mean, let's be honest, almost, I mean, the major shipbuilding nations, the major shipbuilding activity is located in your region. So most of the ships that are built in your region, they have a large portion of European technology. Even if this technology is licensed, you understand that part of the revenue, or let's say a substantial part of capital, is returning back to the original designer of the engine or of the system. So these countries have they have an interest in selling technologies. Therefore, for them, the discussion about ammonia, methanol, biofuels, whatever fuels, is, let's say, of their keen interest, because at the end of the day, they develop technology and they sell technology. On the other hand, Greece mainly, Cyprus, Malta, let's say, as also members of the European Union, they consume technology. So the Greeks, they buy ships. The Greeks buy ships from you. And these ships, they have technology produced mainly in Europe or in the Far East as, let's say, key component. So the Greek owners are consuming technology. So for them, they have the debate is a little different. Question is, which is the right technology to buy? So they would like to eliminate. You can see that tier one companies, very large companies. Allow me not to make any advertisement, but you can see that they have already ordered dual fuel ships with ammonia. Some others are investing in technologies like oil and wind assist technologies, and some other interests, they also explore the carbon capturing and storage units. All of these technologies are part of the technological mix of the future. So we have to understand that the technology risk that was practically eliminated in the past, where we had, let's say, a very simple design of ship, let's say a large ship with one propeller, one rudder, and one, let's say, large two-stroke engine, this and only one fuel, oil, this is, let's say, the past. We are getting into the era where we have multiple technologies, we have multiple fuels, and we also have multiple missions. This is why I said before about the funds that have a very specific interest and appetite to support either technologies or regions or ship size or ship types, because this is, let's say, the different appetite and interest of the investors. So about ETS, yes, you are right, because in some countries, as I said, the ETS is already in place for many years. There are almost 10,000 companies involved in the ETS. I think that most of them are located in France, Germany, and the Benelux. Why? Because the industrial activity of Europe is there. While in Greece, the ETS is an unknown practice. And of course, shipping has always been isolated from the development and evolution of the European industries. So in conclusion, the Greek taxation scheme, let's say the tonnage tax, is a constitutional provision under the foreign direct investment. Therefore, there is no taxation. It is a very simple approach that has been introduced, that has been, let's say, also adopted by other nations. The differences are small. I think that it is the best option that let's say the best card you can play, the best option you can select at a national level is to eliminate predicaments and burdens for owners. The less complicated, the less administrative burden, the better, because this is the global competition. You can see that when other countries do not impose any administrative burden, it's very difficult for a country to impose one. It is like creating problems, or let's say providing, let's say, some more requirements for the competition. And this is one point. The second point is that in terms of technology, we are prepared for a technological mix. In 2050, this is the goal, where we expect to have 60% of the energy mix out of non-fossil fuels. Oil will be there, but emissions from oil is expected to be captured by carbon capturing units. I'm not so optimistic. And going back to the European business, in the north we produce technology, in the south we consume technology. Therefore, the clusters, or let's say the interests, have also a different approach. But going back to what I said, alternative investment financing through funds is the solution to address the appetite, risk, yield, interests of investors. Thank you. And I'm
Okay.
always happy to be in Busan and discuss in private.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, thank you for your offer. 예, 감사합니다. 장장.
2.5 hours passed, but we had a really good discussion with a good topic. Thank you very much for your avid discussion and good insights. I'd like to thank all the presenters, panelists, and all those participants joining us online and offline. Thank you very much for the great session. Thank you.